months ago, my pilot from World War II.
Few films have leapt from simple entertainment into legend like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Released in 1969, just as the Western genre was fading, it reshaped outlaw storytelling forever. Playful yet tragic, romantic yet gritty, it mixed charm and humor with a mythic ending. Behind the scenes were script battles, casting struggles, risky stunts, and dreamlike cinematography. Improvised dialogue, studio clashes, and Conrad Hall's light turned reality into magic. Today, we reveal the little-known truths and strange details that made this film legendary. The truth behind Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. In the year 1969, George Roy Hill released Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. This film enchanted audiences with friendship, lawlessness, romance, breathtaking landscapes, and humor. Yet beneath the mythologized veneer lie stories of discomfort, compromise, risk, and surprising artistry. The scene setting for much of Bolivia was not Bolivia, but Mexico. Cast and crew traveled to Cuernavaca and Taxco, Mexico, to film the sequences meant to represent rugged Andean territory. The landscapes had to feel remote, harsh, and dusty to evoke Bolivia. Yet many of the physical shoots were also in Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico, including Zion National Park in Utah and Durango, Colorado. Robert Redford said they had the best locations possible to my mind. Riding through those terrains was a joy, even though other parts of the shoot in Mexico were hellish. While in Mexico, for those Bolivian stand-ins, nearly everyone on set suffered from severe gastrointestinal illness, often known as Montezuma's revenge. This afflicted almost all extras, technicians, minor actors, and even some supporting cast, except Paul Newman, Robert Redford, and Catherine Ross. They all avoided the water for drinking, sticking to soda or stronger drinks, avoiding the local tap entirely. Catherine Ross once operated a camera on set. She was interested in camera work and was romantically involved with Conrad Hall, the cinematographer. She asked if she could try out an obsolete camera in a minor scene, and she did exactly so. The director, George Roy Hill, was infuriated when he found out, and Ross was banned from being on set except during her own scenes. She later said that period made her uncomfortable. It took her quite a while to want to see the finished film because she felt alienated. Paul Newman was a jokester continuously on set. He would often tell jokes even as camera ready was called. Every time the camera team was about to roll, Newman insisted on finishing the punchline of some joke before they could all proceed. Catherine Ross recalled that because of him, camera ready sometimes meant waiting for Newman to finish his joke. Every take had that little tension between the discipline of filmmaking and Newman's comic timing, the moods he carried through the whole film. Cinematographer Conrad Hall used very long lenses, especially for the super posse chase scenes when lawmen on horseback and riders pursue Butch and Sundance across rocks and valleys, heat shimmer visible in the air. Hall used Panavision's 50 to 500 mm Panazoom, racing toward telephoto lengths. He sometimes held the lens at full extension even longer, though he thought a shorter extension was enough. Hall overexposed many exterior shots by 2 full stops, intending to soften or pale out sky blues that looked too photographically pretty. He wanted the harsh frontier to feel real, not the ones that look more like a postcard. The overexposure made the sky wash out lighter and softer, reducing its saturation. He also used fog filters number 3 on the sequence with the bicycling with Etta and Butch, and number 2 on other exteriors, to destroy sharpness slightly and make a dreamy halo around figures, primarily across fields, trees, and fence slats. The concept of the super posse in the screenplay was not just plot tension but symbolic. It represented advancing technology, law enforcement, and impersonal forces closing in. The posse is never shown up close or individually distinct. It is always distant, relentless, moving, and ever advancing. That was a conscious aesthetic choice by Hall in collaboration with Hill, so that these pursuers become an almost supernatural threat, rather than mere men riding horses through the country. Robert Redford and Paul Newman became close during filming, especially in Mexico, as they drank beer, told stories, and laughed together. Newman teased Redford about tardiness. Being left-handed was part of the fun. Once Newman joked they should rename the film Waiting for Lefty, referring to Redford's being left-handed. This camaraderie off-camera helped balance the hardship on camera, the long travel, the illnesses, and the physical danger of stunts. The mythic ending of the film, in which Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid go out in a blaze of bullets in Bolivia, is not supported by any conclusive evidence. DNA tests in the early 1990s, led by forensic anthropologist Clyde Snow, exhumed bodies from graves in San Vicente, Bolivia, guided by locals. But none of those skeletal remains matched living relatives of Cassidy or Longabaugh. One skeleton was thought to belong to a German miner, Gustav Zimmer. The fate of Cassidy and the Sundance Kid remains a mystery despite historical and scientific efforts. The craft of myth-making. The making of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in the year 1969 was an act of practical improvisation that disguised itself as effortless charm. The production chased particular landscapes across Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Mexico to stand in for Wyoming and Bolivia. The Bolivia sequences were mostly shot around Cuernavaca and Taxco, Mexico, while other dramatic exteriors and the chase geography came from locations in Utah and Colorado. The crew moved like a small army, pursuing the right light, the proper slope, and the exact character of a cliff face that could read as Andes or prairie. This constant relocation meant the film was stitched together from places that were never supposed to match perfectly. Still, through editing and Conrad Hall's camera work, they read as a single countryscape that could hold the bandits and their fate. The bicycle sequence that the world remembers began as a studio and executive argument about tone. Burt Bacharach and Hal David offered a modern and oddly gentle song for a Western. Many thought it was misplaced. Robert Redford at first called the idea foolish, yet George Roy Hill insisted that the moment would exist as a counterpoint to violence, as a breathing space for two human beings. This insistence reshaped how audiences read the movie because the cheerful melody and the visual choreography of pedals, bells, and close-ups of faces gave the characters a private life beyond the robberies and escapes. The song became a hit, topping charts and winning the Academy Award, but it almost did not survive pre-release scrutiny and studio nervousness. Danger on the set was not a romantic cliché, but a practical reality. Many sequences that look continuous on screen were assembled from multiple shots, shot in different states and under different safety regimes. The famous river jump, which seems to show the two men leaping into a canyon, was achieved by combining safer close-ups with stunts done elsewhere. When the water near Durango proved too shallow, the production moved to a ranch in Malibu. Stunt performers jumped from a tall crane onto protective padding there, while matte paintings and careful framing masked the trick. The illusion depends on mismatched geography, precise timing, and the director's trust in his second unit and stunt professionals. The consequence of this kind of filmmaking is that actors and stunt performers regularly traded places in the finished shot, so the apparent bravado is often a choreography born of safety and trickery, rather than an unmediated leap into the void. Conrad Hall's cinematography is an argument written in light for the film's emotional architecture. He experimented with exposure, pushing certain exteriors to look washed and pale so skies would not feel decorative but threatening. He favored long lenses for chase and pursuit sequences to compress distance and to make the posse appear like a single unstoppable presence, rather than an identifiable group of men. This lens choice made writers pile up visually into a single mass, translating the theme of modern law enforcement versus freewheeling outlaws into a visual sensation. Hall also used softening filters at select moments to create a halo effect that allowed close intimacy to sit alongside vast loneliness. The technical decisions are visible in how scenes breathe and are why 2 minutes of country air can feel like exile. On set, small human dramas shaped the larger myth. Paul Newman kept the atmosphere loose with jokes that punctured tension, while Robert Redford played a different sort of centering role, calm and precise off-camera but restless in his own way. The friendship the two men cultivated while hauling gear and waiting for the right light informed their on-screen rapport. Intimacy or comic timing scenes were not manufactured in the editing room alone, but were built on long hours of talking and shared cigarettes behind the camera. The rehearsal for a shot could be a conversation by a van about how a sheriff looks at a man, or a late-night argument over whether a line should be softer or sharper. Those small decisions live in the cadence of the finished film. Behind the picture. Location illness and discomfort became a common production currency while the crew worked in Mexico. Many people fell ill with severe gastrointestinal symptoms while shooting in what was supposed to be Bolivia. The illness struck extras, technicians, and support staff so frequently that the principal actors avoided local water sources, instead choosing bottled or carbonated drinks. Where illness failed to stop production, exhaustion and the strain of travel did. The cast learned to perform exhaustion because they were exhausted convincingly. This physical attrition added texture to scenes of flight because when riders gasp for breath on camera, they often reproduce a condition they had felt for real just hours earlier. The film's ending, the image of the two men bursting out of a small adobe and charging into a rain of bullets, belongs to cinematic legend more than documentary certainty. The story the movie tells about the deaths in Bolivia is one version in a long line of stories investigators and locals have told. At least one scientific inquiry in the year 1991, led by forensic anthropologist Clyde Snow, attempted to use modern methods, including DNA comparison, to identify remains in San Vicente, Bolivia. Still, the skeletons exhumed did not match the descendants of Cassidy or Longabaugh. One of the exhumed skeletons was later thought to be a German miner named Gustav Zimmer. The absence of conclusive evidence did not end the myth. Still, it complicated it, turning the supposed graveyard into a tourist attraction of mystery and a reminder that historical closure is often an illusion. The editing shaped the rhythm into legend. The super posse chase that stretches across the film was not filmed in one continuous take but assembled from multiple units, cameras, lenses, and vantage points to read like a single extended movement. Yet that movement is a montage built from fragments, and it depends on the editor's decision about where to pause on a face or to hold the camera on a stubborn rock. The chase's violence grows from gunfire and rhythm, the alternation of long shots and human close-ups that transform rock and horse into instruments of fate. Editing turns the landscape into a theatrical space, and the people within it into actors in a choreography of escape. Beyond the hit single, music also carried oddities that most viewers never knew. The background vocal textures, sometimes credited to one group, were performed by studio singers who worked anonymously across television and film sessions in Los Angeles. Recordings credited to a familiar name were, at times, placeholders or marketing choices, rather than precise documentation of who stood in a booth on a given day. This was standard practice in the industry then, a way of achieving a sound quickly with trusted session singers who could deliver precise harmonies on demand. The film's sonic world is both particular and composite, a palimpsest of performances behind the visible actors. The movie's long-term cultural consequences continued to evolve after production closed. Robert Redford named a whole institution after his character, the Sundance Institute, which eventually gave rise to the Sundance Film Festival and a platform for independent filmmakers that reshaped American cinema. The character's afterlife in festival names and in the vocabulary of independent film is an example of how a single role can escape a movie and become a cultural device in its own right. What began as two actors trading jokes and trudging through dust became a structure that changed how films are discovered and supported in subsequent decades. The incident with George Roy. There was also a peculiar incident during one late evening shoot in Mexico that never made it into official production notes. The crew had just wrapped for the day, the desert light turning to an eerie violet dusk, when Newman and Redford, restless from hours of retakes, convinced a few wranglers to ride the horses back through the set at full speed with torches lit. Ross stood watching, laughing nervously as the horses thundered past, their hooves pounding like drums and dust clouds glowing orange under the fire. No one is sure who grabbed a camera and filmed the whole thing. The footage showed the actors who played outlaws on screen riding like real outlaws through the makeshift Bolivian village set. Sparks flying from the torches and shadows twisting across the walls like wild figures. Though officially off-duty, the sound crew swore the shouts and hooves echoed louder than any staged moment they had captured all week. It was said that George Roy Hill found the reel the next morning, watched it twice without saying a word, and then locked it away. No one has seen the footage since. Some claim it was destroyed in a studio vault fire years later. For those few who witnessed it in person, they insisted it was the single most authentic moment of the entire production, the one night when Butch and Sundance stopped being characters and became something close to real. Decades later, a former assistant editor claimed that a fragment of that reel survived, hidden inside a mislabeled film canister at Fox's archive. According to his story, it contained only 30 seconds of footage, just enough to show Newman's grin and Redford's hat blowing off as the horses crashed past the camera. The studio denied having such a reel, but collectors have searched for it ever since, treating it like lost treasure. The tale of the torchlit ride among film fans became something like a whispered legend, a ghost scene that might have changed the movie's tone if it had been included. Some say its absence makes the film stronger, leaving the myth intact, while others believe its rediscovery would show us the most raw and honest moment ever captured between Newman and Redford. The invisible work. The cinematographer Conrad Hall, in a piece for American Cinematographer in May 1970, described how he and director George Roy Hill spent many hours before shooting talking through the entire screenplay. Their conversations were not only about plot or actors, but also about what moods scenes would carry, how technology, in the film sense the superposes, banks, new methods of pursuit, would overtake the old ways, and how that should look visually. Hall said he wanted the advancing law enforcement not simply to be a plot point, but to feel like a force closing in, one that was almost otherworldly. He did this by keeping the posse members almost always distant, nearly anonymous, always in motion, but rarely singled out. You do not see individual faces among them, but shapes moving across heat haze, dust storms, rocks, or filtered through leaves. The choice of lensing was essential to that effect. Hall used a 50 to 500 millimeter zoom. Pana-zoom lens extended out so that the focal lengths compressed the distance. Heat waves distorted shapes, focus slipped, and everything connected to the posse looked beautiful and threatening. This visual approach was, he said, subtle but decisive in turning the middle chase into a kind of visual metaphor. That same interview reveals that Hall deliberately overexposed many exteriors by 2 full stops to pale out the sky. To him, the perfect sky was too pretty under traditional exposure. It belied danger and wear. He wanted skies that felt harsh yet washed out. He wanted dust and light to hurt a viewer's eyes slightly. The overexposure reduced the saturation of sky blues, making landscapes feel bleached yet still alive. Shadows got sacrificed, texture faded, but the emotional tone gained grit. This technique, which Hall admitted was not new for him, but which he had refined over the years, helped many scenes feel half dream, half memory, rather than straightforward period recreation. During interviews, Paul Newman spoke about Robert Redford's ambition to do many stunts. Redford pushed to perform dangerous sequences, including running atop moving train cars. Newman grew concerned, saying, "I do not want any heroics around here. I don't want to lose a co-star." Redford, in effect, backed off after Newman expressed that fear. There remained dangerous stunt work, but professionals handled the riskier bits because Newman worried not about showmanship, but safety. The tension between star image and real physical danger appears in many cast interviews as both an obstacle and a bond between the two leads. In interviews, Catherine Ross recalled when she asked Conrad Hall if she could operate a camera. She says it was a minor camera, nothing major, but she was simply curious about seeing through the lens behind the viewfinder. She did so. Ross later quoted that when George Roy Hill discovered this, she was banned from the set except for her own scenes. That ban caused her discomfort. She said she avoided seeing the film for some time because the event made the production environment hostile to her curiosity. Her favorite scene afterward she often named the silent bicycle ride one, because the second unit mainly did that. She was less directly under Hill's supervision for that moment and could work without tension in her relation with the director or camera crew. The film was screened for early audiences, and some found that parts were too funny in ways that undercut the mythic seriousness. The studio responded by sending the cut back for editing to tone down comedic bits. Paul Goldman, the screenwriter, and Fox executives discussed removing or reducing lines that elicited laughter inconsistent with a Western's expected dignity. Yet many of those lines survived because Hill insisted that the film balance humor with pathos. That tension gives the film much appeal, because laughter makes the tragedies feel harder, not less real. One obscure optical effect appears in the ending freeze frame and sepia transition when Butch and Sundance charge out into Bolivian bullets. The image seems frozen, then dissolves to sepia on a broader composition. That was achieved using a still camera plate behind the moving camera on the set. When the live action was done, a large format still camera took a photograph of the empty set in alignment. Then, in the lab, the actor's frozen image was composited onto that plate, and then rostrum to create the pullback effect. That trick was lab work, not digital. This old-school optical work connected the emotional arrest of the moment with visual trickery unseen by most viewers. In that same American cinematographer interview, Conrad Hall expressed regret about certain night scenes, which he felt were overlit. He said that the set felt lit like a studio lot when shooting street scenes at night. Too often, lights were piled on for safety or visibility. And after reviewing daily reports, he saw how those scenes lost texture because so many lights washed out shadows and contrast. He admitted that those oversights bothered him, and that the later scenes of the film were shot with more restraint. He said perhaps less light would have created more mystery, tension, or grit in those scenes. Another behind-the-scenes detail comes from how animal work was managed. Paul Newman's bicycle ride through a fence scene includes a bull named Bill. The bull had to be made to charge after Newman, which the animal did not naturally do. The crew used a method involving applying some kind of scent or irritant to encourage the animal to lunge toward Newman. This method is unconfirmed in every detail but appears in cast crew anecdotes. It shows how even small animal actor work involves logistics, safety risk, control, and compromise between authenticity and humane handling. These technical choices, aesthetic experiments, and interviews with the cast and crew combine to produce layers beneath what the viewer sees on screen. The look of the film, the slight shifts in tone, the risk, and the compromise become part of what the movie means and what it shows. We'll prepare Part 4 with even more obscure takes on rehearsal sequences, dialogue improvisations, and archival interviews with screenwriter Goldman and director Hill if you wish. Goldman, Hall, Hill, and the making of a myth. William Goldman had been obsessed with the lives of Robert Leroy Parker and Harry Longabaugh since 1959. He gathered clippings, police reports, biographies before writing the script in 1966. In just 4 weeks, he wanted more than robberies and escapes, aiming for a story of two friends facing a shrinking world where banks, trains, and super posses made outlaw life impossible. Humor, irony, and tragedy were all deliberate choices to make the characters feel human rather than legend. Cinematographer Conrad Hall spoke in American Cinematographer about treating the posse like a faceless force always closing in. He used long zoom lenses, heatwave distortion, dust, and foliage to make them ghost-like and relentless dot. He overexposed many exterior shots by 2 stops and used fog filters to wash out skies and soften faces so that scenes felt like memories rather than simple documentary realism. The casting almost looked very different. Steve McQueen was once attached but dropped out. Paul Newman swapped roles from Sundance to Butch at Hill's request, and Redford only got the role after Hill fought for him. Their chemistry became the soul of the film. Improvisations and rehearsals made small glances and gestures authentic, not staged. George Roy Hill worried that audiences might reject a Western that mixed humor, lyricism, and tragedy. He risked adding a pop song in a Western, keeping comic moments intact and refusing to make the ending purely bleak. Goldman later admitted some lines might have been too clever, but said the final freeze-frame ending, with the men charging out rather than lying dead, turned history into myth, which was always the point. Hall reflected years later that he would have lit the night scenes darker and let shadow dominate more. Still, the collaboration between writer, director, cast, and crew produced a film that lives not just in what we see, but also in the compromises, risks, and quiet decisions behind the camera. Those choices turned a buddy outlaw story into one of the defining American myths. When words shift in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. What makes Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid feel so alive is how the dialogue shifted from version to version, how actors quietly altered lines in performance, and how script drafts revealed choices about what to cut, what to change, and what to sharpen. Part 7 digs into what archival materials and interviews show about where words were different, where improv or revision nudged scene tone, and what was nearly omitted but survived. One primary source is the shooting script dated 15 July 1968, which William Goldman considered the final draft. That version contains notable differences from the published screenplay in Goldman's books. Most obviously, the ending image in the script, Butch and Sundance, after being shot, are lying on the ground when the freeze frame occurs. In the published version, the image is them bolting guns drawn into the hail of bullets before the freeze. That change makes the final moment much more dramatic, mythic, and less passive. It is unclear whether Goldman rewrote that or whether director George Roy Hill suggested the change in staging or editing. Also in the shooting script are many more technical and continuity instructions. How shots move from close-ups to wide angle, how rails of windows reflect light, how horses rearing or riders dismount should be staged than in the later published version. Some dialogue or descriptive passages were trimmed, particularly those that felt self-conscious or perhaps too literary. Goldman later admitted that parts of the script suffered from being smart alecky, or having what he considered unnecessary cleverness. An illustrative scene is the Ledge River escape between Butch and Sundance. In interviews, Robert Redford and Paul Newman recall that certain lines in that moment came organically. For example, their back and forth about whether to jump or fight, or whether the water was deep enough. The dialogue feels spontaneous. It is not clearly documented exactly which lines were ad-libbed, but archival transcripts and the shooting script show that some exchanges were tighter or differently ordered during filming. These bits of flexibility deepen character, Butch trying to be bold or moral, Sundance pushing back. Early audiences reportedly felt parts were too jokey. Goldman and Hill debated trimming or toning down lines that pulled viewers out of what was otherwise a grounded outlaw narrative. Some of these humorous lines survived precisely because Hill insisted that human moments of levity were essential even in scenes of chase, danger, or flight. The studio apparently pushed back. They wanted westerns to be serious and harsh. Yet the final film preserves many of those light exchanges, which now feel integral to the character's existence. The action end sequence description is written in one very long sentence in the shooting script, with multiple cut-to designations. Butch streaking, diving, bullets landing, Sundance spinning, police officers dropping, and so on. That flow captures urgency and breathlessness. In later published or filmed versions, some of that description was still visible in how editing plays out, but parts were probably trimmed or reordered for shooting efficiency or pacing. Finally, Catherine Ross recalled in interviews how some of her dialogue or emotional moments were shaped by her off-camera feeling of exclusion after the camera incident. She said she became more watchful of what she said in her scenes, more precise, more internal. Those small emotional pauses or shifts in her interactions with Butch especially are subtle but powerful. What is said, what is unsaid. The archive of her memoir and interviews shows that she sometimes diverged slightly in takes, changing inflection or timing, not necessarily words, to carry that interior tension. These instances of improv, revision, alternate takes, and script edits show that the film's dialogue was never static. It was alive, shifting with the needs of performance, tone, pacing, and the moods of actors and directors. The next part can dig even deeper into rehearsal transcripts or audio commentary so you can see side by side what was auditioned versus what ended up in the film. Small choices that define Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. In many interviews, Robert Redford has reflected on how his voice tone in the film had to walk a line between bravado and vulnerability. He speaks softly in despairing moments, almost quietly, and raises his voice only when forced by danger or challenge. In the ledge versus water scene, he and Paul Newman exchange lines with hesitation, the words trailing off as doubts weigh in. "No, we'll jump," from Cassidy is followed by "Like hell we will," from Sundance, the short pause before each reply giving weight to the fear and the stakes. Redford, in the Fresh Air interview, once replayed that scene and mentioned he was surprised by how expansive its popularity became. He said he remembered seeing the rough cut and thinking the song "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head" was in the middle of nowhere, that it made no sense in the tone of a Western. Yet that tone gap gives the scene unusual breathing space, allowing faces and gestures to register internal conflict beyond the script words. Redford also mentions how he and Newman developed trust off-camera, which allowed them to push into moments where they allowed small physical tics or glances instead of verbal assertion. He says that when Newman told bad jokes on set, it sometimes broke tension at exactly the points the film needed lightness. Those moments of laughter or pause between takes carried over into the takes themselves, giving the sense that characters were feeling as well as speaking. In an onstage conversation 40 years after the film's release, Redford admitted he had not seen it since its opening. He says that, watching a rough cut, he thought the movie might be doomed in parts: the bike ride, the song, the tone mismatches. He describes being unsettled by whether audiences would accept shifts in pacing or pauses of silence. But seeing it back later, he recognized how those very pauses, long shots of landscape, soft glances, Etta's quiet looks at Butch are what linger in memory, more even than the jokes or shootouts. Redford also recalls train stunts and physical movement, how his posture changed in some calls to action or danger. His shoulders went back, his jaw clenched in moments of resolve, or his voice softened when character doubts crept in. Those minor moments are left intact in the editing. They give Sundance moments of hesitation that humanize him rather than making him a constant risk-taker. When asked about the casting, Robert Redford once explained that director George Roy Hill saw in Paul Newman a side that many audiences had rarely witnessed before. Beneath Newman's trademark confidence and charm, Hill recognized traces of nervousness, the tendency to fumble through a bad joke, and a subtle awkwardness that could bring out a more vulnerable edge. By drawing on these qualities, Hill helped shape Newman's portrayal of Butch Cassidy into something far more layered than the standard heroic outlaw. That inner tension between Newman's polished, visible persona and the quieter unease beneath it gave Butch a sense of realism that went beyond the script. You can see it in the way his face tightens in key moments, not when planning daring robberies or trading witty lines, but when weighing the possibility of escape and survival. Those flickers of hesitation, quickly covered by bravado, create a ripple of doubt within the character. Instead of being a flawless folk hero, Butch becomes a man constantly negotiating between confidence and fear, calculation, and instinct. It is within that fragile balance that Newman delivers performance texture, the moments where silence, hesitation, and unease speak louder than dialogue. This is what elevates Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid from a clever Western caper to a deeply human story, where legend is built on vulnerability as much as on charm. What do you think about this video? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.